The rain started softly that evening, a quiet drizzle tapping against the windows of their small Oregon home. Emily adjusted the candles on the dining table, trying to make dinner feel a little special. The soft glow reflected off the polished wood, and for a moment, everything looked peaceful. But the peace didn't last long. In the corner of the room, a small camera on a tripod blinked its red recording light. Her husband, Daniel, was filming again. He had started a new habit, recording almost everything. At first, it seemed harmless. He said it was for a personal documentary project, a creative idea to capture everyday beauty. Emily had even supported it. She liked that he was passionate about something. But as weeks passed, she began to notice a strange pattern. Daniel never asked her to join him in reviewing the footage. He never explained what he was really recording for. He just smiled softly, calmly, as though he knew something she didn't. "Do you have to film tonight too?" she asked as she set the casserole on the table. Daniel looked up, his expression unreadable. "It's part of the project," he said, adjusting the camera slightly. "You look beautiful when you're not trying." His words sounded sweet, but something about them made her uneasy. "You've been saying that a lot lately," she replied lightly. "What exactly are you planning to do with all these videos?" He smiled again. "For us, for later. When we forget the small things." Emily nodded, though his answer didn't comfort her. She sat down, forcing a smile as they started eating. The sound of the rain grew louder outside, blending with the faint hum of the camera. Every time she looked up, she caught the lens pointing directly at her. Daniel didn't seem to notice her discomfort. He was quiet, his eyes calm, observing her more than speaking to her. Dinner passed in near silence. When Emily stood to clear the table, Daniel's voice broke the stillness. "Do you ever think love isn't about holding on, but about knowing when to let go?" Her hands froze. "What do you mean by that?" He shrugged, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Just thinking out loud." Then, as if realizing he'd said too much, he turned the camera off and stood. "You look tired. Get some rest." That night, Emily lay awake long after Daniel had fallen asleep. The rain had stopped, but the sound of the camera filled the darkness, a soft electronic hum. She turned her head toward the dresser. The red light was blinking. It was still recording. Her chest tightened. Why would he leave it on? The next morning, Daniel was already in the kitchen when she woke up. The camera was back on its tripod. He was calm, cheerful, acting like nothing was strange. "You left it recording last night," she said cautiously. He looked up from his coffee. "I wanted to remember how peaceful you look when you sleep." She forced a smile, but inside the unease deepened. She couldn't tell if it was romantic or intrusive. Something about Daniel had changed. He was still kind, still gentle, but distant as. If his heart was somewhere else, days went by and the filming never stopped. He recorded their breakfasts, their walks, their quiet moments. But what bothered her most was how he looked at her through the lens, not directly. When she tried to join him in watching the recordings, he refused politely. "Not yet," he would say. Soon, one evening, she walked into his office and found him watching one of the videos. The screen showed her laughing in the kitchen, completely unaware of being filmed. Her breath caught. "Daniel," she said quietly, "why are you watching me like that?" He paused the video and turned to her, his voice soft. "Because I love seeing you as you are. Not posing. Not pretending." "That's sweet," she said hesitantly, "but it's getting strange. You don't even talk to me anymore. You just watch me." He smiled faintly. "You'll understand soon." That night she sat by the window after he went to bed. The wind blew softly through the open curtains, and the moonlight fell across the floor. She wanted to believe he meant well, that this was all just part of some creative idea. But deep down, something told her there was more to it, something he wasn't saying. The next weekend, Daniel suggested they take a short trip to the cabin by the lake, the same place where they'd spent their honeymoon years ago. "It'll be good for us," he said. "Just you, me, and the camera." She agreed, hoping the change of scenery would bring them closer. The cabin was small but cozy, surrounded by tall pine trees and the scent of wet earth. The lake reflected the pale autumn sky like glass. Emily stood on the porch, breathing in the cool air, while Daniel unpacked their things. The first thing he set up was, of course, the camera. He turned it on, pointing it at her. "Still beautiful," he said softly. She looked at him, smiling faintly. "You keep saying that, but you never tell me what this is all for." He stepped closer. "Because it's not finished yet." They spent the day walking by the lake, talking about old memories. For a while, things felt almost normal again. Emily laughed, and Daniel's eyes softened. He filmed her picking up a small stone and tossing it into the water. The way he looked at Earth through the lens, but with warmth, made her heart ache. That evening, as the sun sank behind the trees, they sat by the fire in the cabin. The light flickered across their faces, and the sound of crackling wood filled the silence. Daniel handed her a mug of cocoa and whispered, "Just relax. Pretend it's only us." She smiled. "That's hard when there's always a camera watching." He chuckled quietly. "Then forget it's there." For the first time in weeks, she felt the tension between them melt. The way he looked at her, soft, genuine, made her remember why she had fallen in love with him. They talked about their first date, their old dreams, the things they had once promised each other. The moment was warm, tender, almost healing, until she noticed the faint red light again. The camera was still recording. She turned to him. "Daniel, it's still on." He looked at her, a quiet smile forming on his face. "I know." Something in his tone sent a shiver through her. It wasn't the words, it was how calmly he said them. As if he wasn't recording a moment, but preserving something much deeper. That night, when Emily lay in bed beside him, she couldn't shake the feeling that the camera wasn't just a machine anymore. It was a secret. One she wasn't meant to understand yet. And Daniel. He was still smiling in his sleep. Morning light slipped through the cabin windows, touching the edges of the room where Emily and Daniel slept. The lake outside shimmered with calm waves, and for a moment everything looked peaceful again. But Emily woke up before Daniel, her mind still caught on that red light from the night before. The camera was pointed toward the bed. Even while they slept, it had been recording. Quietly, she got up, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and walked to it. The small screen showed her face, peaceful, unaware, asleep. Her stomach tightened. This wasn't normal anymore. Daniel had said it was just a creative project, but no one needed this much footage of daily life. Curiosity pushed past fear. She picked up the camera and scrolled through the files. Each one was named with a date. Weeks of recordings. Some were titled "Dinner, Morning Coffee by the Lake." But others had strange names like "Truth" and "The End." Before she could open one, Daniel's voice startled her. "What are you doing?" Emily turned, guilt flashing across her face. "Just checking the battery." He smiled, though his eyes didn't. "You don't need to worry about that. I handle the recordings." She put the camera down. "You left it on again last night. You filmed while we slept. "'Kay, told you," he said softly, stepping closer. "I'm capturing everything. It's part of the process." "Process for what?" she asked, her voice sharper now. He paused, looking at her with quiet intensity. "To remember how things really were, not how we think they were." She frowned. "That doesn't make sense, Daniel." He didn't answer. He picked up the camera, checked the battery, then smiled faintly as if nothing was wrong. "Let's go for a walk. It's a beautiful morning." Emily followed him outside, though her thoughts were racing. The air smelled fresh after the rain, and the lake reflected the clear blue sky. They walked along the narrow path that circled the water. Daniel carried the camera as always, filming their steps, the ripples on the surface, the sunlight in her hair. After a while, she stopped. "Can we just be together for one day without the camera?" Daniel lowered it slowly. "You don't understand. This camera is the only thing keeping us honest." "Honest?" She repeated. "Daniel, we're supposed to live our lives, not record them like strangers." He sighed and looked out over the water. "You always see the surface. But this," he held up the camera, "this sees the truth." She didn't reply. She couldn't. The man standing in front of her was both familiar and foreign. his calm voice, his quiet smile, was the same Daniel she had loved. But there was something distant in his eyes, something hidden behind the lens. Later that afternoon, Emily went for a walk alone. She needed space. The forest around the cabin was silent except for the wind moving through the pines. She followed a narrow trail that led to an old wooden dock stretching into the lake. The water was still perfectly reflecting the gray sky. She sat there, hugging her knees, trying to clear her mind. When she returned to the cabin, Daniel wasn't inside. The camera was on the table, still on standby. For a moment, she considered leaving it alone. But the curiosity that had been building inside her finally broke. She pressed play. The screen flickered, showing her face. Laughing, talking, cooking, sleeping. But the videos weren't all recent. Some were from months ago, from before Daniel had even started his project. He had been filming secretly for a long time. Her hands shook as she clicked another file named Truth in it. Daniel sat alone in his study, talking to the camera. His voice was calm but tired. "She doesn't see it," he said. "She's slipping away little by little. The camera is all I have left to hold on to her, to hold on to us." Emily's breath caught. What did he mean? She scrolled forward. Another clip played. Daniel again, eyes hollow this time. "If she forgets me, at least the footage will remember." Her chest tightened. Forget him. What was he talking about? She stopped the video, her heart pounding. Was this a message? A confession? Then behind her she heard footsteps. She turned quickly. Daniel stood in the doorway, watching her quietly. "You watched it?" he said softly. She nodded, her voice trembling. "What is all this, Daniel? What do you mean by 'if I forget you'? What's going on?" He walked closer, his eyes glimmering with something between sadness and relief. "You really don't remember, do you? Remember what?" she asked, confused. He took a deep breath, sitting across from her. "A year ago, after the accident, the doctors said your memory might not hold everything. You'd forget small things, first moments, days, faces. They told me not to force it. So I started recording. I thought maybe one day, if you forgot me completely, these videos would remind you who I was, who we were." Emily stared at him, stunned. Her throat felt tight. "The accident?" He nodded. "We were driving home from your sister's wedding. You hit your head. You've recovered physically, but the memories didn't come back all at once. You forgot parts of our life, our wedding, our first house, little things. I never told you because I didn't want to scare you. I thought filming would help." Tears welled in her eyes. "You should have told me." "I tried," he said, voice breaking. "But every time I did, you got so lost, so afraid. I didn't want to lose you twice." The truth sank in slowly. All those recordings, the endless filming, it was an obsession. It was desperation. A way to keep her close when her mind COULDN, single quotes T. Emily reached for his hand, her heart aching. "I thought you were hiding something from me. But you were just holding on." Daniel smiled weakly. "I was holding on to what we had. Every smile, every laugh. I didn't want to let them disappear." They sat there in silence, the weight of the truth settling between them. The camera's red light blinked softly on the table. Emily turned it toward them and pressed record. She looked into the lens, tears glistening in her eyes. "This is Emily," she said, voice shaking. "And this is Daniel. If I ever forget again, please remind me that I loved him." Daniel smiled, tears streaming down his face. "And that I loved her first." The rain began to fall outside, gentle and steady. The cabin filled with the sound of water against the roof, the same sound that had started it all. Emily leaned against him, her head on his shoulder, the camera still recording a moment of truth. Finally captured the way it was meant to be. For the first time, the camera wasn't a wall between them. It was a bridge, and for Daniel, that was enough. The days after Daniel's confession moved slower than usual. Emily tried to act normal, but her mind kept circling back to the truth. Every sound, every scent in the cabin felt new and familiar at the same time. like she had lived it before but couldn't quite remember when. Sometimes flashes came to Horace's laughter at a beach. A Christmas morning by the fire, the way he looked at her when she said, "I do." They felt like dreams. But Daniel's words had turned those dreams into something real. Daniel, on the other hand, seemed lighter now that the secret was out. He smiled more, talked more, but there was a sadness in his eyes whenever Emily looked away. He still recorded, though less than before. The camera sat on the kitchen counter most of the time facing the lake, quietly blinking as if it were watching over them. One evening, he sat by the window watching the sun disappear behind the trees. The sky turned orange and pink, reflecting off the lake like glass. Emily spoke softly. "I don't remember everything, but I feel like I should. It's like there's something locked inside my head." Daniel reached for her hand. "Don't force it. Memories come when they're ready. What matters is that we're here, now." She smiled faintly, but her heart wanted more than calm. Acceptance, it wanted truth. Later that night, after Daniel fell asleep, Emily got up quietly and walked to the shelf where all the old tapes were kept. Dozens of them, labeled carefully in his handwriting. Our trip, anniversary, the cabin, first summer. She picked one and slid it into the small player connected to the TV. The screen flickered to life. There she was, a year younger, laughing and dancing barefoot in the kitchen while Daniel cooked breakfast. She looked happy, carefree. Daniel turned the camera on himself for a second, whispering, "This is the best morning of my life." Emily felt a tear slide down her cheek. She watched clip after clip, small, simple moments. A picnic in the park. Decorating a Christmas tree. Singing in the car together. She realized how much of their life had slipped away from her, and how patient he'd been through all of it. Then she found a recording titled "The Night Before." The tone was different. Daniel was speaking quietly, sitting alone. His voice was calm but heavy. "If something happens tomorrow and she doesn't remember me, I hope one day she watches this. Emily, if you're seeing this, I need you to know you were my whole world. And if I ever seem like a stranger, it's only because I'm scared of losing you completely." Emily covered her mouth, her chest aching. She remembered nothing about that night or the accident that followed. But now she understood his fear, his silence, his obsession with recording everything. He hadn't been controlling her. He'd been trying to save the pieces of her she'd lost. The next morning, she woke up early and decided to do something different. She wanted to make a new memory, not for the camera, but for them. She cooked breakfast, played their favorite song on Daniel's old speaker, and set the table near the window. When Daniel came out, sleepy-eyed and surprised, she smiled. "What's all this?" he asked. "A new beginning," she said softly. "No cameras, no recording. Just us." For a moment he hesitated, as if unsure whether to believe it. Then he smiled and pulled out a chair. They ate quietly, the air filled with the sound of music and birds outside. It felt natural, almost like the world had clicked back into place. After breakfast, Emily said she wanted to visit the lake again. Daniel agreed, and they walked hand in hand down the path. The sun was bright, and the reflection on the water looked like gold. They sat on the dock where she had once cried alone. "Do you remember this place?" he asked gently. "A little," she said. "It feels peaceful, familiar, like I've been here before." "You have?" he replied. "This was where I asked you to marry me." She looked at him in surprise, her eyes widening. "Here." He nodded. "Right here. You said it was the most beautiful place you'd ever seen." Something flickered in her mind, a flash of that moment. His hand holding hers, the ring glinting in the sunlight, her tears of joy. It came back for a second, then faded again. But this time, she didn't feel frustrated. She felt hope. She reached for his face, smiling softly. "I can't remember everything, but I can feel it. I can feel us." Daniel looked down, tears in his eyes. "That's enough for me." That night, Emily decided she wanted to help him heal too. He had carried her pain for too long. When he wasn't looking, she took the camera, turned it toward her, and pressed record. Her voice was calm but filled with emotion. Daniel, she said, if you ever watch this, I want you to stop recording our past. Because I'm still here, and we can make new memories. You don't need to hold on to what's lost. Let's start over today. She turned off the camera and placed it back where it had always been. When Daniel found it later, he didn't say anything. He just hugged her tightly, as if that one gesture meant more than any recording ever could. Over the next few weeks, Emily's memory began to return piece by piece. Sometimes it came in dreams, sometimes in moments of silence. She remembered their first apartment, the tiny kitchen where they painted the walls blue, and the night they stayed up talking until sunrise. Every recovered memory felt like a gift. A bridge reconnecting her to the man who never gave up on her. One evening, as the sun set over the lake, she handed Daniel the camera. "You can keep it," she said. "But not for the past, for the future." He smiled, touched. "You sure?" "Yes. Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" "Don't hide behind it anymore. Be here with me." He nodded, his eyes shining. Then he lifted the camera, focused on her, and pressed record. But this time, instead of sadness, his voice was warm. "This is Emily," he said, smiling. "The woman who taught me that love doesn't fade, it just finds new ways to be remembered." Emily laughed, leaning closer into the frame. "And this is Daniel, the man who recorded every heartbeat until I could feel them again." The camera blinked once, capturing the golden light around them, the soft wind brushing through her hair, and the quiet smile they shared, and for the first time in a long while, both of them were fully present, no fear, no past. Just the moment they were in. As night fell, the lake reflected the stars above, and their laughter echoed across the water. The story that had begun with a camera watching them ended with two hearts finally. Winter came softly that year. The trees around the lake turned bare, and frost painted the windows every morning. Inside the cabin, warmth lingered in small ways, the smell of coffee, the sound of old music, and the laughter that had finally returned between Emily and Daniel. Life was different now. They didn't record everything anymore. The camera still sat on the table, but it wasn't a witness to every moment. It had become just another object, resting quietly. As if it too had found peace. Emily's memory had returned slowly, piece by piece, like photographs developing in water. She remembered their wedding, their first home, even the accident that had changed everything. One morning she woke up, touched Daniel's hand, and whispered, "I remember it all now." He turned to her, his eyes wide, the smile forming before he could speak. "I knew you would," he said softly. She leaned against him, her voice trembling with relief. "It was the rain that night. We were driving back from your sister's place. You were talking about taking me to Italy, remember?" Daniel nodded, the memory clear in his mind too. "We were laughing about how you'd probably get lost in Venice." "And then the headlights," she continued, her voice quiet. "Everything went white. I woke up days later and you were there, recording, always smiling. But I didn't know why." Daniel held her close. "I wasn't smiling because I was happy, Emily. I was smiling because I needed you to see hope when you woke up. I couldn't let you think everything was gone." Her eyes filled with tears, but they weren't from sadness, they were from the weight finally lifting. "You carried so much alone," she whispered. "You could have stopped. You could have given up." "I could have," he said. "But then I wouldn't have had a reason to keep breathing." They sat there for a long while, letting silence say what words couldn't. In the weeks that followed, life began to feel whole again. Emily started painting, the same hobby she once loved before the accident. Daniel returned to his photography work, though he found himself taking fewer pictures and living more moments instead. Every morning they walked by the frozen lake, holding hands, talking about everything and nothing. It was peaceful, simple, the kind of happiness that grows quietly one day. While cleaning the attic, Emily found an old box of film reels. Some were marked with dates, others just with hearts or small notes. She brought them downstairs and set them on the table. "These are all yours," she said, smiling. Daniel looked at the box and chuckled. "I've recorded way too much." "Maybe," she teased, "but I want to see them again with you. That night, they set up the old projector. The film flickered against the white wall, showing their younger selves laughing, dancing, arguing playfully. They watched themselves grow through years of love, mistakes, and forgiveness. And in every frame, Daniel's love was clear. When the reel ended, Emily turned to him. "You know, I used to think you were obsessed with memories. Now I realize you were protecting us." He smiled softly. "I just didn't want time to erase us." She touched his face gently. It never could. A few days later, a letter arrived. It was from a publishing company. Daniel had been documenting their journey in writing a journal he never told her about. He had submitted it months ago under the title When Love Remembers. The editor loved it and wanted to turn it into a small memoir about memory, love, and hope. Emily was stunned. "You wrote about us?" "Not everything," he said. "Just the parts that mattered." Tears filled her eyes again. "You always find ways to keep us alive," he smiled. "Now the world can know that love doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to endure." The following spring, they decided to leave the cabin for a while. They wanted to travel, to see the places they had once only talked about. Their first stop was Italy, the trip that never happened. Venice was everything Daniel promised it would: by quiet canals, old bridges, laughter echoing across the water. Emily stood on a small balcony overlooking the city, the wind brushing her hair. She looked at Daniel and said, "You were right. I'd get lost here, but only if you weren't beside me." He laughed and wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "You'll never be lost again." As they explored new cities, Daniel carried a small camera with him. Not to record everything, but to capture a few moments: sunsets, street musicians, Emily smiling under the rain. He wasn't documenting pain anymore. He was celebrating life. Months later, back at the cabin, Emily found him sitting by the window, staring at the lake. She walked over and asked, "What are you thinking about?" He turned to her, his eyes warm. "I was just thinking, maybe it's time for one last recording." She smiled knowingly. "What will you record this time?" "Our goodbye to the past," he said. They set up the camera facing the lake just as it had been before. Daniel pressed record and sat beside Emily. For a moment, they said nothing. The camera captured the soft light, the calm water, their joined hands. Then Daniel spoke gently. "This is the last video. For years, this camera was my way of holding on to what we had. But now I realize I don't need it anymore. Because she remembers. Because we made it." Emily smiled, leaning into him. "And because love doesn't live in a recording, it lives right here." She touched her chest. "In every heartbeat, every look, every quiet morning." Daniel reached over and stopped the recording. The camera light blinked once and went still. They sat together, watching the lake shimmer under the sunset. For the first time in a long time, there was no sadness, no fear of forgetting. Just peace. Years later, when their story was published, people from all over the world wrote letters, saying it gave them hope. They called it the love that remembered itself. But to Daniel and Emily, it was simply the story of two people who refused to let time take everything away. On the anniversary of their accident, they returned to the lake again. The water rippled gently, and Daniel held Emily's hand, whispering, "We made it through everything." She smiled softly. "We did. And if we ever forget again, we'll find our way back just like before." He kissed her forehead, and together they stood watching the sun sink beyond the horizon, painting the sky in gold and silver. The story that began with a man recording to remember